This is a strange video about 3 million business professors around the world, like a giant army of ants, chewing on corporations and governments and things and products and services and jobs and employment and human relations and money and savings and pensions and all that stuff. They chew on this giant army of 3 million research ant professors, and they generate zillions of little articles. And uh, you can say some very general things, which is they ask questions and they put together some data and they make conclusions which are really hypotheses that other people, no one else would make. So only these 3 million research professor ants would ask those questions and would put together that kind of data and would draw those kind of hypotheses, hypothetical conclusions from it. And if you're in a tiny little part of business and you want to see what's in business around you, the easiest, fastest, though very distorted way to do it is to look at the over-mathematical, over-complicated, over-analytic, over-individual, over-Western, over-Descartian, over-conceptual distortion of reality in business that every single article by every single one of those professors represents. Now, I'm saying that scientifically and accurately without exaggeration. I have been in 3 business situations and companies that were written up as Harvard Business Review cases. And when we found out about it, we got the article and the reprint, and we handed it around to all of the bosses and employees around me to have a good laugh. We actually had a shutdown on Friday and got out the beer cases and read this thing out loud. I had people read pieces of it out loud to each other. And then the rest of us would all cheer, who the hell is that? What the hell is that? And why haven't any of us heard about it? We're the ones who did the project that the whole case is about. These projects on the 3 things that I was doing were so unbelievably, grossly distorted that, you think of Perry Mason and criminal lawyers on TV, and what happens when the prosecution dies because he's laughing so hard? So these 3 million research ants are producing grossly distorted versions. But even so, it's kind of nice to have 3 million people asking questions the rest of us don't ask, gathering kinds of data the rest of us would not think of looking for, and drawing hypothetical conclusions that the rest of us would never draw. And so you can get an other view of business from that. And there are times where it's faster and easier to use that window into the world than to go call 50 people yourself and carefully interview them on the phone. You don't have time for that. And so it is a shortcut. It's a very distorted shortcut. But it's a shortcut. And it's a very comprehensive shortcut. And there's hundreds of journals out there, and new journals grow all the time as sets of academic friends decide that the existing journals aren't publishing enough of their stuff, and they want promotion faster, so they make their own journals to publish themselves. And I don't mind that. I mean, that's just gaming the system. It's just like stealing money from old ladies on Wall Street if you're a Harvard grad. So we've got these 3 million researcher professor ants doing this. Now, there's this thing called the Academy of Management, and I've never gone to any of their conferences. In part, to be honest, there's a moral disgust in me at business as a field of academia being so popular as where professors aim to go, just because it's got money. I mean, intellectually, that disgusts me. And I'm sort of ashamed to be associated with that, in that I don't want to be one of these typical Americans who just sells his mother to make a dollar. And I really do. I have that feel about Academy of Management publications, papers, and the people who attend their conferences. I just have a feel that only 200 of those people would actually continue with this topic in terms of its intellectual heft and the ideas involved. The ideas in most of these business studies are just simply not interesting enough. And, you know, all of them based on economics of rational utility are simply not plausible enough to be worth their time. And so everybody chased the Ken Arrow crap delusion for 40 years and the Milton Friedman crap of efficient markets for 30 years. And you could tell from the beginning that they were delusional. If you take any beginning economics course in the first 3 weeks, they list the 18 essential parts of human nature that we are not going to put in our equations because it makes the math too hard. And then leaving out human nature, here's how an economy works. I had Paul Samuelson as my 1401 instructor at MIT, and you know, that's a cool game if you can get paid for it. I'll just leave out everything complicated, and then I'll publish a lot of great results that have no relation to reality. It's a great game. But it's hurt the world terribly. We've lost $13 trillion in 2008 due to that game and due to the culture of greed created by the ideology of Milton Friedman and Harvard University. And so the 3 million research ants have this distorted but interesting alternative way of viewing the world, which I like, although I think it's quite distorted and you have to undo those distortions. On the other hand, the actual intervention into business during the last 100 years in America, and I simply don't know about how professors and their research and publishing intervened in business in other countries, so I can't comment there. But in the United States, the last 100 years of professor intervention in business has been almost entirely harmful. It would be very difficult to point to any serious improvement in business practice that had any relation to what any professor did whatsoever. Right, and I don't know before the war so much, although I've read Zubov's history of business schools, and so I know a little bit about the fact that MBA programs were originally created to create an excuse of scientific knowledge to give to daddy's stupid, dissolute son, so that he could be promoted over the guys who built the business with daddy who really knew how to run it, and then he could tell them what to do. And that's a pretty vile origin for a business school and an MBA program, but that's how it was done. And it's in Shoshana Zuboff's book, In the Age of the Smart Machine by Shoshana Zuboff. By the way, Shoshana Zuboff is my nominee for the worst public speaker the world has ever known. If you don't know what I'm talking about, get to give a speech to your... I mean, really, you get chills in the back of your neck. It's just the most breathtakingly bad public speaker you have ever imagined. Anyway, let me tell you my story personally at Xerox, what happened when she was asked to speak at Xerox's first document symposium. I mean, I have it on video too. Well, I used to have it on video. If I still can dig it out of my files, it was something. But anyway, the part of America that I knew was people like my father in their millions being so impressed with the more democratic leadership and capability of the German army during World War II. The better boots, better bazookas, better tanks, better command structure, better tactics, better training, better belts, better coats, and just my dad couldn't use the word German because he'd been trained to hate it. So Peter Drucker came along and called it management by objectives. And boy, was it popular from 1950 to 1970. It was really dominant. And basically, and there's this one interview, I'm not sure if it's Esquire or Playboy, something like that, Men's Magazine, with Peter Drucker, where he sort of gives the game away. And it's basically common sense German management from the 1920s, given to Americans in the 1950s. And the Germans know this. Germans know this. Americans don't know this. But Germans know this very, very well. And then, because Freud had already done the same thing, he'd take the German interest in mythology in the 1800s, and he used it to interpret American family life through the psychoanalysis movement. And then Freud invented this sexual theory of human nature, which turns out he invented the week after he started taking cocaine, and he stopped talking about the week when he finished taking cocaine. So it's the cocaine theory of human nature. It's the Americans bought book, one, and sinker for 40 years. Object relations, Karen Horney, they just fell for it. They euphemized it. It's just got to be one of the most. We need a book on intellectual comedies because there's a bunch of them in history. So Peter Drucker taught 1920s German management to my father's generation from 1950 to 1970, and then guess what? What from 1970 to 1990? Where did people learn about business and change? I mean, a whole theory of business that was totally different from the Japanese. And believe me, no American business school had any part of that. It was places like the American Supplier Institute, Crosby's Institute, etc. that did that. Business schools did none of it. They jumped on board in the late 80s and then quit. And then what happened? Then they learned from Silicon Valley and the web. And then what happened? Then after Silicon Valley and the web in the year 2000 to 2008, they learned from Milton Friedman and Harvard, Jensen's agency theory. And it created the biggest disaster in the last 50 years. So business schools have been a net negative in America, just basically harmful, doing harm. And I think, you know, to be a responsible professor of management, you have to not tell lies yourself about your profession and its good and its bad points. And you can make excuses. Oh, this guy had a good idea here, and that was good. Sure, there's 3 million of them for crying out. Some of them have got to be good. I'm not saying it's all junk. I'm just saying that on balance, if you add it all up, it looks like in America it was harmful. And so you've got to think that those distortions by the 3 million researcher and professors in management around the world, and again, why are there so many more of them in management than in social work? The social welfare industry is the biggest industry in the world, in every economy, in every developing economy, every developed economy. It's the biggest industry in the world, and we have 1/10 the number of people studying it, and we desperately need productivity in it, and instead we have everybody studying where the money is. I just find that disgusting and venal and shameful, and I don't want to be a part of that. I don't like my life being publicly exposed as chasing money in that way. So I've had kind of iffy relation to business schools because of that, because I like the fact that Silicon Valley is an anti-Harvard culture. I like the fact that University of Toronto and Mintzberg at the McGill University are an anti-Harvard culture. I think they're right. Maybe it's the maple syrup, I'm not sure, but at any rate, I think they're right. I think Harvard's wrong. I think Harvard's evil. And I watched McNamara count dead bodies in Vietnam and lose the first American war and kill 5 million people as collateral damage, and spend 40 years, the last 40 years of his life before he died, puzzling about how can a guy with 800 GREs and smart like me be evil. And then it's just so much like Eichmann in Jerusalem by Hannah Arendt. A guy, Eichmann, so competent and professional, how could he be evil? And Arendt captured that. She's a genius at the moral dimension that we have all left because the church was so totalitarian about morality that it gives a bad feel to it. And situational ethics, they used to call it, and that became too much work. If the church doesn't tell you by dictatorship what's right, then you have to judge each case uniquely, and we don't have the tools for that, and it requires a lot of data we don't have. We don't even know basic causation. We don't know how the brain works. So most moral situations we simply can't figure out. Now, we do have these monkey reactions that we either listen to or don't listen to, but then that gets us back into the church, that if you listen to this part of your brain, you don't listen to that part of the brain, you're a good person. And that turned out to be false, so we don't really trust that. The fact of the matter is that it's going to be really difficult to act morally without better causal thinking, and then we don't have the time or money to get the data we would need from most causal thinking. So we're in a dilemma morally, because until you can think causally, you can't attribute correctly, and there's no way to be moral without proper attribution. So, and then you're just following preferred monkey shortcuts, monkey module in the brain shortcuts. And so it's a real research and practice issue. So I'm not negative. I like the 3 million research ants in business. I'm kind of ashamed that we don't have 3 million doing welfare work, because I think that's the bigger industry, and we ought to have more people doing that. I think efficiency is going to have a better impact on the world there than elsewhere. And but I would like them not studying just efficiency in welfare. I'd like them to study how to improve the care that we achieve in welfare outcomes. So I kind of like the idea of social entrepreneurship being studied in public administration departments, where you have at least a few people researching public spirit, rather than in business schools. Although I think it's good to have an anti-culture in a business school, but you know what's going to happen? The Milton Friedman clique is going to assimilate the social venture and social innovation. It just happened at Stanford too. Yeah. And so you end up, look at the papers on Stanford's website for their social innovation. They started in 1971. They've had 30 years to be assimilated, and they are just thoroughly economized and rational utilitized, and very little passion is left, and very little helping the world is left. And it's a very unthrilling experience. It's like reading the homepage for the D School at Stanford under Larry Liefer. It's lost all of its vitality 2 decades ago, and it's been dead for 20 years. You know, that happens. You make your academic great step, and you get promoted to Stanford or MIT and get a big grant from NSF, fall in love with yourself, and you stop working for 2 decades, and your graduate students kiss your butt and tell you how wonderful you are. And I was at a conference in Copenhagen, happened to stay at the same hotel. I won't mention the guy's name, but we all know him, and he's very famous at Stanford. And he sat there 3 days in a row for 2, 3, 4 hours a night, having these 2 assistant female professors kiss up, and they kept asking him, and then Larry, you did this really other great thing after that, didn't you? What was that great thing you did in Germany? Oh, yeah. Blah, 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 blah. And then you did this great thing at this convention. Oh, blah, 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 blah. And they just kept prodding him to tell how great he was. And he did it for 4 hours, 3 days in a row. And my God, I mean, it's, I don't know whether the lady should be blamed or whether he should be blamed, but it was a kiss up fusion reaction with neutrinos of bad smelling fake attitudes coming off of it. And some adult should have been in the room and punctured that balloon and said, you ladies, you need to get about your career and do something more useful to the world than just kissing up to some powerful guy. And then we should go to the powerful guy. And you've got to stop promoting people who kiss up to you, and you've got to start promoting people who have talent. And that way, you know, your organization won't be dead wood.